You're listening to On the Path, Episode 2 with Charlie Keil, Zach Rudis, and John Grusowskis.
Wonderful. And we've been chatting about division of labor as an issue that needs airing out, and that fits with what I happened to bring through the door here in the way of a quotation from Larry Slobodkin. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name since I've just came upon his wisdom. And
how do you spell that?
Slobodkin. He was a very distinguished ecologist, worked most of his life at Stony Brook, had a department there on ecology and evolution, and helped a lot of very important graduate students become ecologists with a good point of view. And here was his advice on career path. What do you do as an ecologist? I think it applies to everybody. My own advice on career development is that there are 3 career paths open, and it is wise to excel at one of them. The first is to become an expert on some group of organisms that excites you. Second, you could become very good at the most popular current techniques at the highest technical level you can imagine. In contrast, you can take the third and most dangerous path. You can strenuously avoid doing what everyone else is doing and search for new ideas and new tests for old ideas. I especially like that last, new tests for old ideas. Constantly reimagining or re-envisioning what Karl Marx said about inequality or equality as a touchstone, or the base determined superstructure, or any of the Marxist basic principles. Dialectical materialism, how do you do dialectics in your daily life? How do you do materialist explanations of things that have come down to us as idealism or idealist ideas? How do you test those in terms of material conditions? All the most basic, and now, 2 centuries old Marxist principles need testing, retesting. How do we do this in a microcosm, in local, small piece economies and so on? How does Marxism fit with that and so on?
I'm interested in maybe taking these ideas and applying them to a case study of music.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about division of labor or specialization, how could we think that through using music as a template? Or we could take someone like John, for example, who is both a multi-instrumentalist but also has a specialization in guitar. So I'd be curious to hear how you deal with that, John, or how you think about that as someone who has logged so many hours with the guitar above all else, but with chops on many instruments.
How I think about the division of labor?
Or specialization.
Specialization.
If you could redistribute your hours of musical practice and training and acquired knowledge, if you could take 1,000 hours of guitar practice and put them elsewhere, would you do it? Would you put 1,000 hours towards piano?
Probably not. Pianos are hard to move around. Impractical.
Right.
No, I think I like being a hack of all trades. I think I like having a little knowledge of each rather than being a master of any of them. It just kind of it's more fun. You can jump around in jam sessions and try different stuff. I think it's important for everyone to have a little bit of drumming skills. Any musician should definitely, rhythm is sort of the core of it all. I still, plan to practice more guitar and get more serious and get better, because I do want to be better than I am. But I think it's like when you think of a video game statistic, when you're picking your character, they have little bar graphs for their strengths and weaknesses. Like, I wouldn't have a particular high bar on anything, but I guess I'm versed in a few instruments, so I'm useful in that sense. So no, I think I like where it's at, but I do need to apply myself a little more to guitar work.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Well, sort of, yeah, because you've sort of expressed the idea that specialization is valuable to you as a professional musician. I don't know. Well, I don't know if you really said that from a professional standpoint or from a creative standpoint or from both. But it seems that in your answer that specialization is valuable to you.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's probably more valuable professionally than being versed in a lot of instruments. So yeah, there's always that desire to improve, become more skilled, become more fluent, more fluid, more speedy, whatever it is with the guitar, with the fretboard.
You notice that Slobodkin there, in his three-pronged approach to career development, he puts knowing about one thing and being an expert in that, and that's kind of the first thing he thinks of, is really being good at something. And then, well, there's this other way of going to the latest techniques, and then this third way of proving or trying to disprove or invent a new idea and prove it, or, that's the third and dangerous path.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the path of the generalist, to look at the whole spectrum of instruments you can choose from. I love what you said, Johnny, about being a hack of all of all trades. Mozart was a hack. Shakespeare was a hack.
Mm-hmm.
They both were in it for the money at a certain very early point in their lives, and Shakespeare knocked off 4 or 5 plays a year to keep the audience coming, to keep those people coming through the gate. You could knock out a play like Hamlet or whatever in 5 weeks. He was in it for the gate, for the guy with the time. What did James Brown have? He had this guy. First time I went to a James Brown concert, there was a guy at the gate there for James. Click, 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 click. Who's coming through the doors? Getting a head count to make sure that James was getting the right amount of money for his performance.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Brown's man, not the management's man, making sure that he wasn't going to be cheated on his...
Smart.
It's like division of labor. Who's counting the gate? Who's doing this? Who's doing that? That's one way to look at collaboration, is that there's a division of labor in any collaboration. Somebody's bringing a little bit more math in the science world, and somebody's bringing a little bit more evolutionary
Everyone
theory.
has their strengths, and I think
Right.
that's a big thing in education. Children are often, if they don't fit into the mold of the curriculum, they're deemed, behind or special needs, but every child is different, has different strengths, and maybe they're not excelling in English class or math class, but maybe they're really creative, or they're a dancer, or they're...
Right.
You got to find each kid's passion and foster and facilitate it, and not just try to fit them all into the same mold. We have to look at society like that it's all about collaboration, and some people are good at some things, some people are good at others. Finding those strengths and watering them, rather than, this person is behind because
Right.
they don't,
And stressing the weaknesses is always detrimental.
Yeah.
This is what stopped what was about to be a big success for Muse Incorporated in Buffalo. We were trying to get mentoring going of older children teaching younger children, 6th graders, working with kindergartners on dance steps, that kind of thing. And I'd go and I'd say, look, you've got some terrific dancers now. We've been at your school for 2 years, and we've seen young men and women who are really going to be great dancers if they want to be. And they all know how to drum, and they're singing as needed. Can't we get those people down to the kindergarten and 1st graders? That's what I'm trying to accomplish here, is get mentoring and internal creation in one school, one institution. Can we have people mentoring down the line and bringing along these very young kids to be great dancers and drummers and singers just a few years from now? And they said, well, these people you've picked out, they've each got a problem or another. They're not good at math, or they're not good at this, and so they need their study hall time.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, no, they don't need study hall time. They need creative cooperation, helping little kids to become skilled time. better they should be learning how to teach than being perpetual students and always inadequate.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Kids
and
need to
I couldn't
feel
sell that.
strong.
I couldn't sell it to the principal or the vice principal. And similarly, when you have really talented people going into schools, artists and residents or whatever, very often they're kept in a corner. They're not, or they're over-distributed. Everybody's got to get a little piece of this visiting artist, and nobody gets the whole person. Nobody gets the impactful message that somebody might bring to a situation.
It's like, all right, back to math class, everyone. You've had enough art for the day.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like supervising a balance so that everybody gets exposed. One of my most hated words, exposed to music, exposed to art. They don't participate in it necessarily. They learn to appreciate and applaud the sculptor, or
They
enough
see it
about
through the
it.
glass, but they don't engage with it. Yeah.
And not engaging, not participating, I think, is death of the mind. It's like you can watch it, but you can't do it. We got an awful lot of watching going on and
Yeah.
not as much doing as we need. So the division of labor it's important. I think of it as a comb. You're trying to build your comb to be idiosyncratic. You know a hell of a lot about this, and then something down the other end of the comb is 3 or 4 prongs, and you got some gaps in your comb that some collaborator is going to help you fill in, and you're combing reality with these special corners of your operation, your process. But you're going to come up with a different version because of your comb. Your toolkit is different. So helping to diversify a toolkit, knowing a little bit about every instrument. What instrument haven't you played? And what could it tell you maybe about the sounds you're looking for that you can now get on a synthesizer, I suppose, any way you want it. But what do you want? What do you want to be your sound, your way of putting sounds together? Each individual has to be asked that question. You know what I mean? How do you want it to sound?
I think it's difficult that whether we like it or not, we're forced to deal with our own creativity as an overlay over capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
So what is playing music? Well, playing music is playing music until when? Until it's time to get paid for the gig, and that presents a whole plethora of complexities. And
Mm-hmm.
I think about that a lot with you, John, when I've thought about what's special and the fact that you're a professional musician and the ways that you have to conform to this thing that you didn't create and you didn't ask for when you were a 14-year-old kid learning to pluck away at strings and playing Rage Against the Machine songs on drums.
So you're saying creativity is allowed to exist in that it contributes to, or in the capitalistic structure, like.
Or like if we come back to specialization, for example, like is capitalism or the structure of the touring music industry, is that pushing you, nudging you, or forcing you towards specialization? If you didn't have the economic imperative in your life of maybe being a guitarist or being or a synth player / guitarist,
Mm-hmm.
would you explore other avenues more freely?
Right. The stress might be less on specialization and more on enjoyment and collaboration. And, you don't need to be a virtuoso to sit around the campfire and connect with your neighbors.
Right. Yep.
It's fun to be able to impress your neighbors and family members, but with your newest lick or whatever. But yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing, this whole guitar virtuosity thing and pushing each other to new levels of human achievement. But at the end of the day, I'm with Chuck in that it's sort of a rough around the edges, ragtag, all-inclusive format for musicking that I think is the most fulfilling, most gratifying.
Yeah, that's what I missed in the little jazz concert that was just here.
Mm-hmm.
It was so wonderful for me to hook up with Steve Swallow again after only a couple of get-togethers over a 50-year period. He came to Buffalo a couple of times, and we could hang out and talk. But it's been what, 3 or 4 of those conversations and a couple of phone calls over the years. That's very limited engagement with somebody who I really treasured in that summer that we played together all summer and had some amazing experiences together. And I wonder about Steve and complete pros. They get so good at what they're doing that it's becomes a kind of a limit on their spontaneity after a while. You get to be our age. We're both in our 80s. He's 1 year younger than I am. He showed up at Yale as a freshman when I was a sophomore, and we immediately had a kind of rapport about how to keep a rhythm section going. But he loves certain kinds of poetry and spent a lot of time thinking about what is good poetry, a big Robert Creeley fan. That's why he came to Buffalo the last time. And having that, connection to poetry, connection to politics, to religion, keeping it all afloat, so to speak, being a whole person, a generalist, rather than a division of labor specialist. I think that's crucial. It was crucial for all those New Orleans musicians who were barbers by day or bricklayers or plasterers or, they all had a skill, a day gig. They did their music at night and on weekends. And all the musicians were versatile 100 years ago. If you were a cello player, you also played trombone. If you were a violinist, you played cornet for outside work, for brass band work. I did a little article on that for Allegro, I think it's called, the local 802 magazine. They all doubled twice. You double cello and trombone or bass and tuba, and you also have a gig as a printer by day and a musician on weekends, or if there's an opportunity at a theater before the talking movies came in, there were a lot of working musicians who still had 2 gigs. Mm-hmm. They do the film thing in the afternoon and the evening, and then they'd be doing printing or taking a shift at the printing shop or whatever day gig you happen to have.
That makes me kind of imagine a spectrum of how segmented are our lives and how, where does music, for example, we'll just say music for now, what place does music occupy in a life? Is it something that's other time, like now's music time and the rest of the time's lifetime? Or is it your profession? Is it in that middle ground? Or is it seamlessly a part of your day? Could music be spontaneous at sunrise, midday, sundown, middle of the night? So there's a 1,000 shades on that line.
Right.
And
either of you guys,
I wonder about where we're at.
did either of you guys look at My Music? The book that we did with has 40 odd people, from little kids to elders, responding to the basic question, what's music about for you? Mm-hmm. It is such a spectrum of responses. And we did over 200 interviews, undergraduates going out and doing the interviews, and graduate students editing and trying to figure out how to position them and so on. And we had over 200 interviews, and none of them, with the exception of 2 or 3 Grateful Dead heads, who specialized in the generality of the Dead. I'm glad I put it that way. They gave me maps of all the different music that went into the Grateful Dead mix, from bluegrass to rock to rhythm and blues, rock and everything. Jug bands. And tunes from everywhere, and the Grateful Dead are the total totality of music. And I'd have to say, well, guys, there's 99% of the other world music, that's not Grateful Dead. But they had this notion that within the Grateful Dead world, everything was summarized. There was a total evolutionary trip to the...
That sounds like religion to me.
Yeah, well, they were the
Sorta.
ones who were a little bit of a tribe, that they had their own. Otherwise, every single person that we interviewed a little Indian girl from the reservation down on Skajakwada or some creek or someplace where she was coming from, and she was a total Muddy Waters fan. And then there was what we called the punkette. Neither one of them got into the book. The punkette, as we called her, had different kinds of DIY punk bands that I'd never heard of. And she said, when I'm in a sad mood, I put on these tapes. When I'm in a really happy mood, I go to these three bands.
Music
When
as
I-
medication.
Yeah,
as
well, it
mood
was
regulator.
like I used this spectrum of what we would all put in one little corner of punk circa 1983 or something. And she had a different, she distinguished four different streams of music for four different personal needs that she had. So it was a kind of complete world with subdivisions, a division of labor or a division of, intensity for this, all worked out in her head. And a lot of people were like that. They had whole worlds of musicking that were almost always talking about records and recordings and very little about their own personal music making. Even people who are good at music and doing in a band or whatever would talk about music in this big, broad sense, and we're into everything, kind of in different reasons for being into these different kinds of music. So there's the point I'm trying to make, I think, is that division of labor is one thing, and division of response, that people divide the world into different kinds of musicking for different occasions, different moods that they're in. It's a really interesting, the whole notion of division
It makes me think of
is
how
really interesting.
It makes me think of how some people, when they use music to treat mood,
Mm-hmm.
I feel sad, so I'm going to put on something sad and indulge. Or I feel sad, I'm going to put on Jimmy Cliff and blow the roof off my sadness. There's like homeopathic music treatment. There's aggressive counter my mood music treatment. There's everything.
Right.
People are using music in so many ways.
Yep. And that's what the book revealed, was that this unlimited ways to be musical and to internalize all the different kinds of music that there are around you for your own purposes, for very idiosyncratic purposes. I couldn't believe, some of these interviews we'd sit as professor and graduate students and just marvel at what somebody had said that was so insightful or so revealing of their own unique path in the world. So I see this as a constant. Jonny, your first answer to his first question was really great, because it was like, yes, get as good as you can get on one thing, which is also Slobodkin's formula. Really know one group of organisms that excites you, right? It's exciting for you to really get good on the guitar. Oh, I can do that George Benson thing. I'll do it. Or I can do this, or I can do that. Finding different things in other guitarists and celebrating it. I hear something I can do with a guitar and my voice at the same time. Why not? And you've gotten really good at that. Your question to Jonny about being a solo act and being successful at that, and being in a trio, and doing work with the children, play with the children. And that's another thing I want to get back to, is work as a division of labor thing. And that's very oppressive, I think, most of the time for most people. But the fact that he can do the solo thing and make money, the trio requires a whole lot more work and, moving and touring and packing and unpacking equipment, etc.
A lot of moving parts.
Yeah, a lot of moving parts and a lot of sacrifice of time, energy to get out there to people. When he was touring, I was always saying, Johnny, come home, sit here, work with the children, and now that I know he can make pretty good money as a solo performer, it seems to me like the trio should strictly be a recording exercise. You try to get to the next level of what you can do in a recording studio in hopes of getting a record that everybody wants to listen to, or a sound that...
It's a very shifting landscape.
Yeah.
Obviously, John knows more about it than we do in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But my perception of it, if you had asked me 5 years ago what's up with the music industry, I would have guessed that selling albums is dead.
Mm-hmm.
You make money by touring. And if you had asked me 2 months ago, I'd say I don't know where the money comes from because you can't tour anymore.
Right.
Is that accurate, John?
Mm-hmm. So people are trying to stream, do virtual concerts, teaching more, that kind of thing, selling merchandise.
Right.
Major faux pas.
That's nice drumming. I wouldn't call that a faux pas in our podcast. That's just a chance happening.
What is that drumming, John?
Good question. It's the ringtone, but...
Oh.
Does that mean we're timed out?
We are not timed out. We are at 27 minutes.
Oh, okay, good.
So I figured, for those people who don't know Charlie, we kind of jumped right in last week. We didn't give any sort of background. Charlie's a published author. He's an ethnomusicologist. He was a professor at SUNY Buffalo for years. He's interviewed everyone from B.B. King to Malcolm X. I was actually in college, and one of my music professors handed me an article that was written by Charlie and Angie. So he's out there, his writings and his thoughts. So he just referred to his book, My Music, which is exploring how music, the role music plays in different people's lives, different ages, different walks of life. So you can Google Charlie Keil, it's spelled Keil, to learn more about his philosophies. And more recently, he's been working on his book, Born to Groove, which is all about the importance of children gaining rhythmic skills, dance movement skills, anything that makes them feel sort of fully alive and fully expressive, connected and participating and collaborating, which has had a huge effect on me and the Music Cellar, where you're hearing this podcast from. One of our biggest goals is to combat feelings of inadequacy, like Charlie mentioned earlier, which is something I wanted to return to, that many kids feel inadequate if they can't fit into the standard curricula format and structure offered in mainstream school systems. Chuck, what can that do to a kid, do you think, if they constantly are feeling inadequate or behind?
This feeling not part of, not with it, not in the in-group, not in the in-crowd, not fully participating. This is what comes up at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, at Al-Anon meetings, at all the 12-step programs, are in a sense combating that feeling of not belonging, of not being part of being on the margins, of not feeling it your personal process and this school or this Sunday school or this whatever institutions you come up against or are being encouraged to get into and do well in. It's the disease of our times, alienation. Feeling the way a lot of people, the cliche that you hear in AA is not comfortable in my own skin. not being part of this, or this. It's not bringing out the best in me. It's making me feel like I'm a marginal, inadequate, not up to it, substandard, all of that stuff. And that's the division of labor, if you will, of dumbing down. What does it mean to be dumbed down? It's meant to be, you're not good at this, you're not so good at that, you're not doing well here either. You go from one class to another and being told that you're not up to snuff, you internalize that if you're a little kid.
That's fascinating. So it's a very basic human need to feel connected, part of something.
I would say it's the most basic.
That, I agree.
Yeah.
If we don't receive that, it could manifest as trying to fill that void with substance abuse.
Right.
And we're dealing, mental health professionals have been sounding the alarm really since, it seems to correlate rather well to the smartphone.
Yep.
But many, many, many young people dealing with serious anxiety issues, mental health issues.
Right.
And I think what the good doctor, Charlie Keil, is prescribing is a good medicine to combat that kind of social isolation.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting? We've never been more connected, but also simultaneously disconnected from each other.
Right. And the COVID amplifies that.
Oh, yeah.
I keep thinking that COVID is a gift.
Maybe.
It's a wake-up call. You cannot invade these rainforests and not get SARS, MERS, HIV, AIDS, on and on and on. There's 25 or 30 viruses that used to be in reservoirs in one animal or another, domesticated or wild. And now these viri, plural, that's not in the dictionary. They don't want to pluralize virus, but there's so many of them, and they're in so many different creatures, and they're spilling from domesticated to wild to humans.
I was listening to a podcast on the way here, the Ezra Klein show, and he was interviewing someone who just finished putting together a podcast called Future Perfect. And so I heard a sample of the Future Perfect episode, and what they're talking about is factory farming of animals.
Got to go.
And how much of a threat that is. Not just talking about animal welfare. In terms of pandemics, viruses, this is a nightmare.
Yep.
The CDC tracks potential threats. They said 7 out of the top 10 infectious disease threats are zoological.
Right.
And we want to slam the Chinese wet market. They've got all these weird animals that we wouldn't eat. Well, what about when you have 3 million pigs in little pens chewing each other's tails off?
Right.
That's a danger.
Debeaked chickens crammed next to each other. The factory farming, and that's why I think one of my favorite current authors, Roderick Wallace and his son, Rob, they are two people in the midst of Monthly Review, the Left Monthly, who are just, I don't know how to describe it, not succumbing to the division of labor, right? They're thinking politically, economically, philosophically, mathematically. Roderick Wallace puts everything in mathematical formulas in relationship to COVID. And the two of them, Rob titles his book, Big Farms Make Big Flu. And they make big viral damage and chaos for the entire planet. And it all could be stopped if we stopped invading the rainforests. That would stop the spillage of viruses from wild to domesticated, from domesticated to wild, from mammals to birds, from birds to us, from mammals to, you know what I mean?
Yep.
There's this constant overlap of
But even if we get out of rainforests and continue factory farming,
right,
let's say just in continental America or China or what have
no
you.
No more monocropping, period.
The antibiotics situation is a cocktail for disaster.
Right.
The fact that we're giving 70 to 80% of antibiotics in the United States are being fed to factory farmed animals
And then end up in the water supply.
in the water supply,
Yeah.
in your body.
Yep. And like plastic in the water, in the air, little minute particles of plastic are everywhere. When I first looked at a farm, I was thinking of buying a farm up just across the border in Massachusetts on the Housatonic River, and then I went and did a little research on PCBs. Do a little research on PCBs.
Thank you, General Electric.
So the Housatonic River is our local waterway here, which was polluted in the 70s and 80s by General Electric in Pittsfield, Mass.
Right.
In their production of electronics and televisions. And PCBs, which stands for polybiphenol.
You can't pronounce it. You don't need to pronounce it.
It lives in the sediment and in the mud, and you're not supposed to eat the fish out of the Housatonic River anymore. I did a fair
And it's
deal
in
of
the air.
swimming in it as a kid, and
Yeah.
I'm okay.
Johnny's twitching.
But monocultures you mentioned, I know my professor Milford Graves would always talk about how it's dangerous to. He's like, man, plants don't grow like that in the bush. And if you look at his garden, everything's on top of everything. There's plants coexisting with each other, different species, different types of plants all together in one. And anytime you isolate things and synthesize things, and it can get dicey.
Right.
So I think that goes to what you were saying about monoculture. I did want to return quick to the importance of children feeling engaged. My absolute favorite TED Talk was Sir Ken Robinson. Sir Ken Robinson did a talk called "Do Schools Kill Creativity?" And I just wanted to read a short anecdote from that.
The little girl.
Little girl Jillian.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that.
I thought about that before.
He said, this little girl, Jillian, the school wrote to her parents and said, "We think Jillian has a learning disorder. She couldn't concentrate. She was fidgeting. I think now they'd say she had ADHD. Wouldn't you?" But this was the 1930s, and ADHD hadn't been invented at this point. It wasn't an available condition. People weren't aware they could have that. Anyway, she went to see this specialist. So this oak-paneled room, and she was there with her mother, and she was led and sat in this chair at the end, and she sat on her hands for 20 minutes while this man talked to her mother about all the problems she was having at school. And at the end of it, because she was disturbing people, her homework was always late and so on, little kid of 8, in the end, the doctor went and sat next to Jillian and said, "Jillian, I've listened to all these things that your mother told me, and I need to speak with her privately." He said, "Wait here, we'll be right back. We won't be very long," and they went and left her. But as they went out the room, he turned on the radio that was sitting on his desk, and when they got out of the room, he said to her mother, "Just stand and watch her." And the minute they left the room, she said, she was on her feet, moving to the music. And they watched for a few minutes, and he turned to her mother and said, "Mrs. Lynn, Jillian isn't sick. She's a dancer. Take her to a dance school." I said, "What happened?" She said, "She did. I can't tell you how wonderful it was. We walked in this room, and it was full of people like me, people who couldn't sit still, people who had to move to think. They did ballet, they did tap, they did jazz, they did modern, they did contemporary. She was eventually auditioned for the Royal Ballet School. She became a soloist. She had a wonderful career at the Royal Ballet. She eventually graduated from the Royal Ballet School and founded her own company, the Jillian Lynn Dance Company, met Andrew Lloyd Webber. She's been responsible for some of the most successful musical theater productions in history. She's given pleasure to millions. She's a multimillionaire. Someone else might have put her on medication and told her to calm down."
That's the punchline. Put her on medication and told her to calm down.
So just again, that theme, we can't try to fit kids into the same mold. We need to facilitate their strengths, their interests, keep it fun, play-centered, and let them blossom into what they're blossoming into, what their muse they want to follow.
Right.
It's like get out of the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you also need, this is where I think of dropping the whole teacher taught, laying on of culture and so on and so forth, and just think about what is in each person and making sure we're getting all of it. That's where the division of labor can kill somebody. A little kid can over practice on one instrument and get to be virtuosic and then not know what to do with it. So we I think, as guides, you teaching English as a second language, Johnny doing the toddler jam, that spirit of jamming, of let's see what happens. Who wants to pick up which instrument? Well, this is the third time she's gone for that xylophone over there, or she's picked up on the synthesizer and wants to see what she can make come out of this. Just you follow the lead of the kid,
Exactly.
and magical things can happen.
You can learn so much from a student,
Yep.
you know? As a teacher, you also have to learn from them.
Maybe this is the time to tell my little Lily story. 10 months old, Afro, my daughter, had, I guess, worked with her quite a bit about ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah, wing, wang, walla, walla, bing, bang. Because she says to Lily, who is busy just learning to walk at 10 months, she's crawling, taking a few steps, both back down to the floor, crawling faster than she can walk. She's over undoing drawers, taking things out of drawers, putting them back into drawers. It's time to clean up. Oh, cleaning up is good. Yes, I can get to put things back in drawers. You know what I mean? She was enthusiastic about everything. And Afro says, come over here, Lily. I want to show Grampy something. And so she sings, ooh, ee, ooh. And Lily, like white on rice, timing perfect at 10 months. Ah, ah. Ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah. She's on it. Her timing not off by a millionth of a second. Wing, wang, walla, walla, bing, bang. Ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah. She's on it. I said, whoa, timing at 10 months. Who knew? I said, where do you think this happened from? She said, well, she hangs from that basket with the 2 hooks on the door jamb, and I put on Wilson Pickett, and she bounces in time. She's not walking yet, but she's bouncing in time to the Wilson Pickett album. She said, I think somewhere in there is when I tried the ooh, ee, ooh, ah, ah a couple of weeks ago, and she got on it. And I said, she sure is on it. We go around again, silence, because we're talking about her, right? Mm-hmm. She knows that it doesn't do anything. And we both, Afro and I, pause for about 30 seconds. No ah-ah. Absence of ah-ah as a statement of Lily, I'm not going to be your little performer at 10 months, you know what I mean? And then I said, Lily, put something else in there. But at the same time, ooh, ee, ooh, ah! And she gives you the Wilson Pickett scream, or I don't know. From that one little incident, which was all of a minute or two, of just time passing, I came to the conclusion that every kid at 10 months or 9 months or 11 months, toddler jam, pre-toddler, before they toddle, let's help them bounce in the chair. Let's help them hear all the danceable music that there is. Let's help them. So there's plenty of helping to do. And teachers, or let's call them guides, yeah. Soul guides, spirit guides, Here's how to help you get into the mood, get into the spirit of it, have fun with it. We've gotten somewhere, and it's frustrating as hell to me that whatever I put on the web in the way of Born to Groove material, and I'd urge anybody listening to this to go to our borntogroove.org website, where we have videos and audios that are designed to help a mother and a child get into a groove one way or another, with a guiro or with a shaker or with a drum. I hope people would go to it and tell me why it's not working. What would be a better opening? When we have another virus come through, and there's going to be more until we stop invading the rainforests and stop factory farming, until we stop monocropping the world or exploiting it in mono ways, we're going to keep having viruses come through. When that happens, that's where I hope the Born to Groove website, that's exactly what it's for, is to facilitate 2 or 3 people getting live with it and celebrating whatever that little kid is about to become the next day. How do we make this work? Because it's not working well for people right now. I don't get any tips in the tip jar. Some months pass before somebody puts something in there. I want to encourage you 2 guys to go, preferably with a mom and a kid, or some kid who might want to pick up on it if you do, to see what's wrong with the little stimuli that we got there.
Maybe we should put it in Spanish.
I would love to get it. My dream is to get it to China, South Korea, and Japan, where there are a lot of women sitting home with a newborn or a kid, and dad is climbing the social ladder, or salary man, as they say in Japan, who not only works 10-hour day, but then parties with the same people that he's been working with. They go out at night and party, and then they come home. Mom gets to see the husband, time to make a new baby, or, breakfast, boom, they're gone again. So those moms are sitting at home in China, Japan, South Korea, and we could give them this if we could only figure out how to get it to work.
It's a tough. I think I'm not saying it's a non-starter, but I'm saying in my experience, having taught, at this point, I've taught 1,500 different Chinese students English.
Yeah.
And I ask many of them about their hobbies, almost all of them. Anyone who can string together a little idea, I ask them about their hobbies. I ask them about if they play instruments. And 99 times out of 100, they are forced to play prestige instruments. They're forced to play violin and piano, classical violin and classical piano, and they're often sent to boot camps in the summer. So I have students who play 8 hours a day. They go to a school every day for 2 months, and it's 8 hours a day of classical piano, and these kids are having like nervous breakdowns almost because they have their big piano. I'm talking about 8-9-year-olds who are under immense stress to level up. All right, I'm in level 6. I have to be in level 7 next year. I have my big piano recital, my big exam. It's insanity. Wow. It's the opposite. And more often than not, they hate it. Yeah. They don't like playing violin. They don't like playing piano. It's a sad state of affairs. So how do you change that paradigm? I don't know.
You have to keep it fun.
It's a tough cultural code.
The kids are going to have to sneak up on it, maybe.
Interesting that their parents prioritize European music so much.
Guys, I have a wonderful story, but we'll save it for the next hour. How are we doing for time?
We are at 47 minutes.
Good. This has been a hell of a good discussion.
This has been a good one.
Yeah, and we can just continue it for the next time. The story I wanted to tell immediately was I got to give a lecture to the entire Beijing Philharmonic Orchestra. This was arranged for me by the family of Crooks. David Crook and his wife Isabel. They had been
I thought you meant like...
No, that was their name. That was their name. I'm sure they're both gone by now, but their children live on, and they were born in China, know Chinese better than they know English, but they know both languages perfectly well. I had one of Professor Crook at the Foreign Language Institute. His son was doing the translation, and I had a presentation that I was making wherever I was asked to do it on American music, and I did country and Western, Afro-American soul music, gospel music, blues, jazz examples from different eras. And I explained how these different musics had evolved as people's music.
What year are we in here?
This is 1980.
Okay.
And I was there for a couple of months and got to know I was going to the Philharmonic to get lessons on the double reed sona, or zorna in Greek, a double reed instrument that has been crucial from ancient Greece to the present time, and it went all the way across the Silk Road to China, to Japan. It ended up as a little instrument that noodle peddlers play to advertise that the noodles are coming. That was it, sort of trailed off there. And in the hichiriki, the little double reed that they play in the court. So it got to be, a crazy specialty in Japan and court music.
Can I interject quick?
Yeah.
I just want to say one little thing that I thought was funny. That there's like a noodle instrument. In Spain, there's like a little pan flute that knife sharpeners use.
Wow. Yeah.
You hear it? It's like they just do a sweep. They just do like a
yeah.
And the knife sharpener's outside.
Wow.
Then he goes town to town like that with his flute.
Yeah.
Sorry.
See, Romani, gypsies all over Europe, are using different vocal techniques through a loudspeaker or playing bouzouki music in Greece, or, they play the local music or something that they know will say, oh, that's the gypsy peddler of watermelons or of Paponia, melons of all kinds, or that's the somebody. So this kind of musical identity, Watermelon Man. Herbie Hancock explains it as something that he heard a woman singing, or the Watermelon Man was singing it to people in balconies in New Orleans or something. So this little signature thing is great. Anyway, I could tell you all kinds of stories about China, but doing the Beijing Philharmonic, I gave my little talk and said, I can't seem to find people's music in the People's Republic. I can only see conservatory music, the privileged aristocratic instruments, the shing, the equivalent of the koto in Japan is a big instrument in China for getting in touch with the ancestral traditions. And I'm seeing all kinds of music that's highly prioritized, but I don't hear much people's music, what people actually want to sing to each other in the streets. And so at the end of this talk, which I said I was critical of bourgeois music. I said it's wonderful to have a debate on Debussy as to whether he was decadent or not, and to have a symphony orchestra here to play all that music. But I said it's not people's music. It's not from the bottom up. It's not your traditional music responding to modern conditions and so on and so forth. The conductor of the orchestra, who was a famous dude in China back then, got up and gave me a talking to that I got it in translation back from Young Crook, and he was outraged that I would challenge the hegemony of bourgeois music. He said, China must have a symphony orchestra in every major city if we're going to have factory production, if we're going to have modernization, if we're going to make products that are equal to any products made in the world, if we're going to become economically viable as a country, if we're going to have a future at all, we must have symphony orchestras, and they must have the discipline of, four elements to a symphony.
It's part of the industrialization, westernization package.
If we can't get the symphony orchestras to prosper in Japan and be full of great violinists and cellists and so on, if we can't do that, we'll never be modern. We'll never catch up to the West. We will never have any kind of a role to play in world history. You're saying that we should just give up all these things and just sing for the fun of it? No way is this possible. You threaten our very existence as a people. I think that's what he was saying. They couldn't take time to translate all of it, but I think I got dressed down but good. Wow. As, someone who was subversive of...
Good for you, Chuck. I'm glad you were there speaking to them.
I would love to get a recording of this. I'm sure it was recorded.
Can you concede?
It's probably in a vault somewhere.
Can you concede any of his points?
No. I mean, I've come over the last 20 years since I retired and don't have to like all music to be a credible professor. I've come to really hate bourgeois music, all of it. Except, as you go back from Beethoven and so on. Beethoven was an improvising piano player. Did you guys know that?
I did not know that.
I didn't know it until Alex Ross piece in the New Yorker about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, where this wonderful piano player who's acclaimed as the 30-year-old genius of Western piano playing. He's the Lang of Europe. He is, we got to think about time running out. Yes. We can pick this up another time. But this is why I dislike Western music. And I think this guy is coming to the same conclusion, this genius-y piano player. He's done all the Beethoven piano things. He knows that Beethoven was an improviser. He loves Thelonious Monk's compositions and improvisations. He's ripe to turn his back on the whole thing and just woodshed for a couple of years and come up with his own Beethoven symphonies, or his own piano creations. And I think he's at the brink of doing that. He says, I'm bored.
That's
with
point
this.
number 3.
Yeah.
Search for new ideas and new tests for
Yeah.
old ideas.
Right. I think this is a great quote, isn't it?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Because it applies across the board
You
in
can s-
any
yeah, you
specialized
can-
field.
You can understand so many things through it.
Yep.
I also wanted to say, John, in some way, I feel like you're doing all 3.
Yeah. Johnny is.
Specialize in a group of organisms, specialize in technique, and search for new ideas.
And Zach, what you told me about the situation in China now,
Mm.
of people forced to do through composed virtuosic, blah, 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 have to read music, literacy. You got to read, there's this chapter by Alan Farmello in Born to Groove that takes apart the 5 things that are oppressive about Western music and realize that this is 0.1% of the world's music is written. All the other peoples of the world, 2,000 tribes in Africa and hundreds of different cultures in the Philippines and so on, they're all not doing literacy, virtuosity, any of those things that are prized by the West. Oops, sorry.
Well, that was a great discussion. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Zach.
Thank you, John.
We'll see you next week for On the Path.